From being chased through and almost killed in a deadly maze to discovering a horrifying crime scene that involved his son, there have been many scary episodes in Dexter, and today we'll be going over the scariest ones, starting with one of the worst ones. Buck the System, Season 7, Episode 3. Dexter begins to get a new target after finally getting Deborah to give him some space.
I called you, didn't I? And you talked me down. It worked. Why can't you back off?
He looks through a few records in the police database before landing on a man who was recently released on an assault charge and had been suspected in the murders of 2 other women but evaded conviction. In each case, the victim had an earring ripped from one ear, which Dexter recognized as a serial killer keeping trophies from each kill. Certain he has a potentially viable target on his hands, Dexter sets to work stalking Speltzer and documenting his actions. Though he is unable to convince Deb of the morality in killing Speltzer, Dexter continues to vet the criminal in hopes that he can still change her mind before another woman is killed. Speltzer's next victim is first seen when Dexter tracks him to a bar and lures Deborah there to give her insight into his process. Speltzer is seen chatting up an attractive waitress, and as it turns out, he invited her to his house.
How long did you say you've been here?
A few days.
I mean, you could have at least taken the plastic off.
From the moment the waitress arrives at Speltzer's home, there is an unmistakable air of eeriness. He opens the door and towers over the unsuspecting victim, speaking with a slight grin in a low, disarming voice. Meanwhile, Dexter is seen lurking around the cemetery where Speltzer works in search of evidence of his guilt. He enters a creepy mausoleum where he finds Speltzer's shrine containing the trophy from his previous victim, a single earring in the center of a strange symbol. Standing in the lair of a deranged murderer surrounded by his trophies and decaying bodies, Dexter is unfazed and takes a picture as further evidence for Deb that Speltzer deserved his table. When we return to Speltzer and his victim, his mask has begun to slip as he says one disturbing sentence after another to the woman who is now growing visibly worried.
You look strong.
Thanks, I guess.
I like it when they're strong.
He then pounces on her, covering her mouth and smothering her screams. He leans in close to her face and says, "Let's play a game." But that is only the start of the horrors. Speltzer releases his captive into a dark and winding maze, complete with disorienting flashing lights, blaring music, and dead ends. He slowly follows her through the maze, wearing a black leather helmet with large horns protruding from either side. With no clue how to escape, the girl is eventually cornered by the madman and beaten to death. From her patrol car parked outside of Speltzer's home, Deborah notices the strange lights and loud music coming from inside. She decides to investigate further and leaves Dexter a voicemail to let him know as she approaches the house. Deborah arrives too late to know where Speltzer or the woman may have gone and finds herself locked in the deadly maze, gun drawn. As she stumbles around each corner, it's unknown what she'll run into or where the killer is. Still, she bravely goes deeper and deeper into the maze, determined to catch Speltzer and rescue whoever he was hunting. Suddenly, Deborah is grabbed by the ankles and dragged to the floor, her gun is sent flying, and there's no hope and Speltzer closes in on her, no doubt intending to do the same thing to her as the waitress. Just as it seems Deborah is done for, Dexter arrives and hits Speltzer over the head with a large piece of wood from the maze, knocking him unconscious. He helps Deborah up and she lets Dexter know about the original captive. When they find her, she is unresponsive, badly beaten, and one of her earrings has been ripped from her ear. This confirms to Deborah what Dexter already knew. Speltzer was guilty of the original 2 murders he was suspected of. But when they return to the area of the maze they left him, he is gone and a nearby window is open. He had gotten away again, meaning a serial killer was loose on the streets with a reason to want Deborah dead. Unfair Game, New Blood Episode 8. Episode 8 of New Blood is terrifying from the very beginning. It opens with a scene of Harrison as a group of bullies from a local high school's opposing wrestling team have surrounded him and began to close in. The boys are clearly meaning to do him harm, but the most frightening person in the room is actually Harrison. He is outnumbered but begins to fight the boys off one by one, and the energy of his response quickly shifts from one of self-defense to one of sadistic pleasure. At one point we see Harrison, armed with a baseball bat, begin brutally bashing one of the boys without mercy as he cowered on the floor before him. The sound of pulverized flesh and breaking bones echoes in the room as the boy's blood splatters across Harrison's face. Few things throughout the series are quite as haunting as the look of glee and self-gratification Harrison displayed during the gruesome attack. Though it turns out to be a dream, the beginning of Unfair Game is a very scary one with all the right elements to leave viewers with a chill. Not slowing down, the episode then exposes the first scene to have been all a dream in the mind of Dexter, who had been knocked unconscious and abducted by one of Kurt Caldwell's goons. As he came to, he found himself zip-tied and gagged in the backseat of a beat-up truck, still at the mercy of his captor. He overhears the man on the phone with Kurt discussing his kidnapping and the progress of Kurt's plan for revenge. When he hears a reference to Harrison, Dexter springs into action to protect his son, and this leads to the next most haunting images of the episode. The goon loses control of the truck and crashes, rendering himself unconscious and giving Dexter the opportunity to free himself and run. But the chase is far from over. Elric wakes in time to see that Dexter is escaping and continues the pursuit. Dexter limps away and Elric keeps after him. After managing to slow his bleeding, Dexter buys himself some more time and a bigger lead by creating a false trail using his blood to divert his attacker. But Elric figures it out quickly and is back on Dexter's tail in no time. Finally, Dexter is able to lead Elric to an abandoned camp in the snowy woods where he hides out in the shadows.
Stupid motherfucker took a knife to a gunfight.
Waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When Elric enters the camp, we catch a glimpse of his face, which is possibly one of the most disturbing images in the show. He leans in to inspect the damage in the mirror, and just as he gets close, Dexter leaps through the glass, breaking it and sending Elric to the ground. The combination of the jump scare and Elric's nightmarish wounds work perfectly together in yet another scary scene. He eventually extracts the information from a quaking Elric and kills him, plunging the knife into his chest in signature Dexter style. In the final scene of the episode, Kurt has successfully manipulated Harrison into coming with him back to his cabin after lulling the boy into a false sense of security.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I do all my hunting out here. It's where I keep my venison.
He feeds Harrison and offers him a glass of scotch before finding a reason to leave the room for a moment. Kurt reemerges, donning his kill suit and brandishing his rifle. All of his feigned niceties fall away as he forces Harrison out of the cabin at gunpoint, horrified and confused. As he'd done to so many victims in the past, Kurt commands Harrison to run. He has no choice but to follow the madman's instruction. He turns to run as Dexter bursts onto the scene in Elric's truck. Believing it to be his henchmen with Dexter in bondage, he shouts to hurry them, saying he wants Dexter to witness the murder of his only son. As the truck nears, the revenge-crazed killer realizes it is not slowing down and starts shooting at Dexter through the windshield to stop him. Ultimately, Kurt is forced to dart out of the way of the truck to save his own life, and in the end, he is the one on the run. With Kurt on the loose and now even more enraged, the episode ends with a distinct feeling of unease. Number 3. Truth Be Told, Season 1, Episode 11. Fear in this episode grows gradually as more and more pieces of the puzzle fall into place to reveal the identity of the ice truck killer to Miami Metro homicide. As the episode begins, Deborah's boyfriend Rudy is shown in bed with a prostitute. Having seen her in previous episodes, viewers know that this woman had spent a memorable night with him before. She had already spoken with Detective Batista at Miami Metro and was considered a loose end for Rudy, with the potential to expose him as the ice truck killer. With that in mind, it's impossible not to fear for her well-being as Rudy continues to seduce her.
That wrinkled flesh on your radiocarpal joint is far from perfect. It's quite unsightly, actually.
Not soon after, her body is found cut into pieces that have been wrapped and placed under a public Christmas tree in Miami. During the investigation, Dexter discovers a videotape underneath the dismembered torso of the woman, the only clue left by her killer. In yet another disturbing display of his disregard for human life and the police, the ice truck killer had forced the woman to make the video after abducting her. The video opens with her crying, terror in her eyes as she recites words that have been written for her.
You arrested the wrong man. May the world think I'm a rank amateur.
Just as she finishes reading the message, a darkened figure comes into frame and the last sounds from her are a yelp and a gasp as she is killed. The woman cries. Her tears and the expression of sheer horror plastered on her face are so chilling that it's hard for even the seasoned homicide department to watch the tape for the purpose of the investigation. Nevertheless, they push forward. Meanwhile, Rudy has been on a mission to help Dexter figure out who he is and is gearing up to play his last card. He'd previously convinced Deborah to go away with him for the weekend on a yacht, which worries her for all the wrong reasons. He calls to make sure they are still on track for the trip, but Deb informs him that she's got to work. The discovery of his last victim actually prevented her from getting the time off work. Still, Rudy is able to get her to agree to a short dinner. Deborah says she can slip away for an hour, but insists she will have to return to work. With that minor hiccup out of the way, Brian is able to continue his plan confidently. Upon her arrival, Brian continues his manipulation, flattering her and offering her her favorite flower. Deb lets him know that the length of the drive means she can't stay for dinner because she has to turn right back around, but he persists and drops to one knee. Using his charm, he convinces Deborah to stay just a bit longer after the proposal. Suspecting nothing, she reluctantly agrees to join Rudy for just a short while on the boat he took so much time to prepare. He gets her off of the deck and into a secluded part of the boat. There, he finally allows his mask to slip. He gets close to Deborah from behind, much like he's done to his victim in the beginning. Deb slowly begins to realize that something is amiss, but it's too late.
You know the one thing I've been dying to ask you? How did you not know who I was? You're a cop.
Soon, he has rendered Deborah unconscious, and as he uses duct tape to restrain her limp body and prevent escape, by now Dexter has determined Rudy's true identity and rushes back to Miami Metro to make sure his sister is still safe. But by the time he arrives, of course, Deborah has already unwittingly left to meet Rudy, much to her own peril. When he is unable to get any help from dispatch in locating Deborah, he takes off to find her on his own. The episode ends with Rudy sailing off with an incapacitated Deb laying helplessly on the floor, and with the season ending in the next installment, the lack of any resolution for Deborah makes this episode all the scarier. Number 4, My Bad, Season 5, Episode 1. Haunting does not even begin to describe the scene of Rita's dead body, sitting lifelessly in her own bloody bathwater. Her ghostly eyes were left open, her head hanging limply to one side. Nearby, her young son Harrison sat on the bathroom tile sobbing hysterically, soaking in his mother's blood as it overflowed from the tub. The child's cries rang out through the halls and were heard by Dexter, who rushed toward the sound. When he came upon them, Dexter was understandably shocked and ran to Rita, calling her name, but he realized immediately that she was already gone. He turns to retrieve his son from the floor, horrified to see that his face and clothes were smeared with Rita's blood. Dexter knew that this was the work of the Trinity Killer, whom he had killed just hours before discovering his wife's body. Dexter calls the police and informs them of the situation. His voice is robotic, and his description of Rita's condition sounds more clinical than concerned. After police arrive, Dexter appears to have gone into shock. His eyes are focused in the distance, and he isn't making much sense at times. Deborah and LaGuerta are able to shield him from the police questioning at the time, but due to the case's high profile, the FBI remains eager to speak with him as soon as possible. Internally, Quinn is growing curious as well due to Dexter's strange mannerisms following the death of his wife. Tension builds as Dexter's connection to the Trinity Killer is threatened to be exposed with these prying entities investigating Rita's murder. Settling in at Deborah's house for the night, Dexter has a lot to figure out. The stepchildren he shared with Rita, Cody and Astor, are out of town staying with their grandparents, and he needs to find a way to tell them. He also needs to keep his connection to the Trinity Killer under wraps from his sister, his department, and the FBI. As he is struggling to solve the mounting dilemmas, Dexter is haunted by the sight of Rita and Harrison in the blood-stained bathroom. He is tormented wondering what Trinity may have done and said to Rita before killing her, worsened by the fact that now, with Trinity dead, he will never know. Overwhelmed by his circumstances, Dexter decides to run away after telling the children of their mother's death. On his way out of town, Dexter asks Deborah if she will look after Harrison but doesn't tell her of his plan to flee. He stops by Rita's memorial before any other mourners so that he can see her privately one last time. In his final words to her, Dexter admits to his wife's body that
I'm a serial killer, that's what I am. I know I led you to believe I'm a human being, but I'm not.
He then stops by his storage unit, grabs his blood slides and a few necessities before burning the rest of its contents to the ash. Tortured by his memories of Rita, Dexter sets off on his boat with no intention of coming back. Shortly into his escape, Dexter realizes he needs to gas up his boat and docks at a nearby marina to get fuel. Inside the fueling station, Dexter immediately sees an irritable man, Rankin, at an unattended register shouting for a key to the restroom. When no one comes to assist him, the stranger grabs the business bathroom key. When he notices Dexter standing in the doorway, asking Dexter
What's your problem? Fucking retard.
Here's when the episode delves back into horror. Against his better judgment, Dexter follows the ill-tempered man. When Rankin hears Dexter enter, he turns to face him, aggressively demanding to know what Dexter's problem was.
I've had a bad week. My wife died and it was my fault.
But your dead wife can suck my dick.
Blinded by pain and rage, Dexter swings the grappling hook at the man, narrowly missing. As they hit the ground, Dexter lands on top of his prey and begins to bludgeon him mercilessly with the grappling hook. His face and shirt are splattered with blood as he hits Rankin over and over again with all of his strength. He crawls off of the man's lifeless corpse and looks at himself in the bathroom mirror before dropping to his hands and knees and letting out a pained scream. The terror of this scene is the reminder of Dexter's true nature. Dexter is known to live by a strict code that requires he only kill other killers who are worthy of death. When he snaps and brutally kills Rankin, a person that is undeserving, the knowledge of what Dexter truly is cannot be ignored, and it is frightening. At the end of the day, Dexter is a killer, and a disturbed one at that. Seeing him covered in the blood of an innocent man howling on the floor like a dangerous animal is a disturbing sight that stuck with many. Even more disturbing is that he returns to attend Rita's memorial directly after killing Rankin in cold blood. There's something about a man who can commit murder without a second thought and then seamlessly blend in with mourners at his own wife's funeral that raises hairs on the back of the neck. Altogether, the ghastly imagery of this episode paired with the overarching sense of death and grief is what really makes it dark and disturbing. With Dexter's surprising attack added to the mix, this episode is easy nightmare fuel. Number 5, Sins of Father, New Blood, Episode 10. The finale of Dexter New Blood was filled with tense-filled moments that kept us on the edge of our seats from start to end. In episode 10 of Dexter New Blood, Dexter and Harrison are returning home from murdering local serial killer Kurt Caldwell, only to find that their cabin was burnt to the ground. As his final act of revenge, Kurt had set their house ablaze, most likely intending for them to perish in the fire. As they arrive, they see that tons of police, fire patrol, and kind community members have gathered to help sort through the wreckage in their hour of need. The chief of police, who is also Dexter's increasingly estranged girlfriend, Angela Bishop, lets them know that authorities believe that the fire was the result of arson. Dexter pretends to be shocked, and Angela asks if anyone has any reason to target them. He says he can't think of anyone, even as grisly memories from his recent kills rush to the front of his mind. Harrison, knowing everything now, gives Angela a false lead to keep her from discovering his father's deeds. By the time of the fire, Angela has long suspected that Dexter was hiding something sinister, but when investigating the fire at his house, she finds evidence of his involvement in the murder of a local resident, Matt Caldwell, son of Kurt Caldwell. She is incensed by this discovery and begins to plot Dexter's arrest. Angela arrives at her house and watches the man she believes to be a killer playfully interact with Harrison and her daughter Audrey. She enters the house and sends the children on a trip to the store as an excuse to get them out of the house before ordering Dexter to turn around and get on the ground. He does as she says, though he can't know what she's discovered about him. In keeping with his father's code, Dexter is still averse to being caught. He seeks a way out, his eyes flitting up to the knife block on the counter in front of him. Was he considering killing Angela? Before he can make a move, her partner Logan bursts in as backup and escorts Dexter to the patrol car. The intensity of the episode is set from the start with Dexter's arrest, and after a tense interrogation, Dexter's fate remains unclear. While Dexter sits in jail, the chips continue to stack against him. Angela contacts his old co-worker from Miami Metro, Angel Batista, who thought Dexter to be long dead. Flabbergasted by the news of his reemergence, Batista tells Angela that he will head to Iron Lake first thing to help her with the case. With the two of them looking into Dexter, chances of escape look bleak. The fear factor of the episode really ramps up when Angela returns to continue her interrogation of Dexter, alerting him to her knowledge of his identity as the Bay Harbor Butcher. She threatens him with the death penalty back in Florida. At that point, Dexter decides to throw a Hail Mary and clue Angela in on what Kurt had been up to around Iron Lake for the last 2 decades. He tells her to search his remote cabin if she really wanted to know what real evil looked like. With her stagnant unsolved missing persons case on the line, Angela takes the bait and rushes to investigate Dexter's claims. Now left alone with Logan at the police station, Dexter sits in his cell stewing over the situation. From the beginning of the scene, an eerie feeling sets in. Long shadows cast upon the gray brick of the cell with a somber melody in the backdrop. He screams enough as his thoughts overwhelm him. Seeing no way out and growing more frustrated by the second, he hastily forms a plan and calls Logan over to his cell with a request for water. When Logan approaches Dexter, the unease really sets in because Dexter is now a cornered animal and there is no telling what he is capable of. Now having immobilized and disoriented him, Dexter demands that Logan hand over the keys so he can get back to Harrison. Breathless and covered in an innocent man's blood, Dexter fishes the keys from Logan's pocket and opens the cell door. Using Logan's phone, Dexter calls Harrison and tells him that they have to go immediately and that he will explain everything later. He steals a police vehicle and heads to their rendezvous point. Meanwhile, Angela is approaching Kurt's cabin all alone and unsure of what she is even walking into. She opens the latch and descends the ladder into the crawlspace. There, in the bowels of Kurt Caldwell's cabin, she finds the bodies of his victims, the girls from the missing persons case she had been working on her whole career. In easily one of the most disturbing rituals of the series, Kurt Caldwell had been perfectly preserving the women he murdered and encasing them in identical glass casings. Angela walks through in disbelief for just a moment before losing her nerve and running for the exit in horror. She radios for Logan, still unaware of his death. When she gets no answer and is reminded that he was left alone with Dexter, she begins to fear the worst. She rushes back to the station to find his lifeless body where Dexter had left it. When Harrison meets up with Dexter and notices the blood on his face, he pieces together that his father must have killed Logan. Harrison is disillusioned and disgusted, realizing that Dexter does not only kill to save people, but out of convenience. He refuses to go with his father and says he should turn himself back in. Understanding his son's moral dilemma, Dexter tries to leave without him, but hears the cock of a rifle when he turns his back to run. Harrison is aimed directly at his father and demands he acknowledges how many people he has hurt and the evil he has done. It dawns on Dexter that Harrison is right about him. He instructs his son to shoot him in the heart to put an end to all the chaos and get actual justice for his victims. Harrison pulls the trigger, striking his dad in the chest. The finale of New Blood was a roller coaster of emotions, the fear and tension rising with each scene. The uncertainty surrounding every aspect of the story cultivated fear around the fates of everyone from Dexter and his son Harrison to Angela and Logan. The horrific shots of preserved corpses, the image of Dexter's blood-splattered face reminding us of his inner darkness, and the sickly sound of Logan's neck snapping came together to create a truly disturbing conclusion to the season.